Hey guys, welcome back to a new episode of Dev Drawer. This week we're going to be doing another compilation video just because it's the Christmas holidays, New Year holidays, so I don't really know what my recording schedule is going to be looking like. So I'm just going to make it easy for everybody and push out a very long video that kind of details a few projects that we've done in the past, maybe a few months ago. If you remember, we built an app using a custom API that we developed using PHP and MySQL. We tied it all in together using AJAX and jQuery, SammyJS, and then the front end code just using straight HTML and CSS3. So with this app, we were able to build something that just kind of hit a database, created navigation, as well as page content from the API, and it all kind of leads up into building our own custom API from this simplified API that we're using, and I'll go over all of this into the tutorial as well, so just stay tuned towards the end of it. But before we get started, if you're not a subscriber and this is the first time you're visiting the channel, I have videos like this all the time. This is a compilation, so you can kind of see some of the videos that I push out all combined into one. So if you're not a subscriber yet, definitely subscribe to the channel. I try to do these videos every Monday. And if you like the video, hit the like button and leave me a comment. So I think that's it for now, so let's go ahead and get started. It's actually kind of simple. We're actually going to be using HTML, CSS3, jQuery, SammyJS, as well as Cordova. So eventually we'll get into the part where we can actually build it out into an app. But what I want to do today is kind of introduce you into the SammyJS. And if you're not familiar with it, it is a JavaScript library that's been around for a while. It'll basically allow you to create templates and routes like you would in something like Laravel. It may not be as robust as what you could do in Laravel, but you can do get and post and create routes. And this is a very easy way to be able to build a pretty good app. I mean, I wouldn't say it would do everything because it will be a hybrid app, but it will allow you to build a rudimentary app if someone ever asks you to build one without having to know native code in order to build Android and iOS. This will allow us to build a website and then take that code and put it into a Cordova web folder and then use Cordova to build out the app that's ready for iOS and Android. So right now I'm not going to go into the if you wanted to do like an API or the functionality like that, maybe we can get into that into a later tutorial where we can take what we build and actually be able to create dynamic content from a PHP database using an API. But for now, let's just go ahead and take what we did last time, which is we built a live server, I guess, using Visual Studio Code, and we just put on Bootstrap on it, and I just showed you how to spin up the server. So just to kind of recap what we did last time, we installed a add-on for Visual Code, and you can go over here, and it's called Live Server, created by Ritwick Day. And then once you have that installed, you go to your file, and then you hit Go Live, and it'll start this server over here in our browser window. And basically, it's the same thing that you just saw on the screen. So I'm gonna go ahead and close that one out, and close this out. So now we're kind of back to where we was in the last video. So I might go through this a little bit quicker than normal just because it's not really in depth. It's just kind of showing you how to get it started, what it does, and then we can kind of go into a little more details as we go on. So first thing we want to look at is on our live folder that we created in our last tutorial. We just created an index.html file. We added the Bootstrap CSS as well as the Bootstrap JavaScript. So today what we're going to do is install SammyJS and then use it to build our routes. So if we come over to our browser and we search for SammyJS, then we go over here, you have a download button here. Basically we're going to be using the SammyJS script as well as the template script, and that will allow us to create template files and then be able to call those files within the SammyJS routing. So I'm going to go ahead and download this. We're going to download the minified version of it, and then inside of our live folder we're going to create a new folder called JS, and then we're going to create a new file called sammy.min.js, and then we're just going to paste what was in the sammymin.js that we see over here. So now we have the Sammy file available, but we also want to do the Sammy templates as well. So if you click on the GitHub link, it'll bring you to GitHub, and you can look through their where is it at? I'm trying to do this in the mobile browser right now. Alright, so if we look through their library and then we go to plugins, actually I think we can go into the Minify and see the plugins. There we go. So we also want to find one that says Sammy.template. So let's go down, and we got Sammy.template.latest. So we want to open this one up, and we're going to view the raw code just so we can copy and paste it like we did with the other one. And then inside of our JS folder, we're going to create a new file, and it's going to be sammy.template.min.js. And then we're going to paste that code as well. And then we are going to also come in here, and we're going to create a new file called app.js, and this is where our scripting for our basic JavaScript is going to live. And to make it a little bit easier on ourselves, we are going to add jQuery, or not add jQuery, we're going to utilize jQuery, and we're just going to call the pages as a function, and then within that function we'll create the routes. So first thing I want to do is start our JavaScript, or jQuery, and then I'm just going to call a function called getPages, and then let's see, we need to close this out. What did I do wrong here? Oh, don't need this. Okay. Alright, so then inside of here we're just going to create a function called getPages. We don't have to pass any parameters or anything like that to it. We're just essentially using this as a way to kind of organize our code. So within this getPages function, we need to reference a div ID that we have on the page. So we currently don't have anything here. So I'm going to, let's say I'm going to remove this, and we're going to do div ID equals app, and then we can close that out. So now we have something that we can reference over here. So we're going to tell it that we want to set a variable called app, and it's going to equal to the Sammy call. And if you're wondering where I'm getting this at, if you actually go to the Sammy.js page, they give you an example that you can get it started with. So let me go back to the SammyJS page. One more. There we go. So basically I'm typing this out right now. So we have we're using our app, and then we're going to pass the function. So we got our div app, so app here, and then we're going to pass the function to actually use the routes and call the template. Okay, so inside of this we want to do this.use, and this is where you would call any of the other plugins that you're using for Sammy. For right now, the only one we're using is the template plugin. That's just telling it that we're going to be using templates for routing. Okay, let me look over this. So we got var app. You can verify it on this too. So we got var app. We got our app ID function, and then we're not using mustache, we're using template, and then we actually define the routes. So let's go ahead and define our first route, which we are going to set up as our I guess the home page. So let's do this .get, and then it's going to be #/ and this hashtag is very important, and I'll show you whenever we start going through some of the other pages. It's basically like you're loading the page without having to refresh the page, so it's pretty cool. It actually does keep the paging back and forth and stuff like this, so whenever you're creating an app, they won't see that URL bar, but they'll still be able to access the page as if it was a website, and be able to hit their back button and it goes back to the previous page. So it's very important that we keep it the way that I have it right now. And then we're going to pass a context variable inside of this function, and now we're just going to tell it that we want it to swap out whatever content is on the page. So if you go to a different page, but if you go back to this link, it's going to swap out the context, and then it's going to add the context from another template. So let's go ahead and we're going to use the location, the href, which would be this here, in order to better distinguish which pages that we're trying to hit. So let's create another variable, and we're going to say variable string equals location dot href dot to lowercase, and that's just basically taking whatever's beyond this, whatever this is, it's just making it into lowercase so we can actually use it for classes, or we can use it for going to get the pages that we need to get. You don't necessarily have to do it that way, but that's just the way that I learned how to do Sammy. So it's just something that it may not even be used anymore, but I've always included that in everything that I've done with Sammy. Okay, so now we're going to use that context variable that we are passing, and we're basically going to say swap with nothing, and that'll make it where whenever you go to change the page, it will remove the previous content so that you're not in there having to try to hide divs, show divs based on whatever page you're on. This is basically going to tell it to take away whatever's there and replace it with a blank, and then render the next step. So let's go do the next one, which will be context.render, and then we're going to reference a page that we'll create in a second. So we're going to create a folder called pages, and then we're going to create these template files. So let's say this one is going to be home.template. And then we're going to pass nothing to it. You could pass variables to it like you could in Laravel or any other kind of PHP routing. Right now, this is the home page. We're not pulling anything for it, so we're not going to pass anything to it. So we're just going to leave it like this, and then we're going to append to context, and then this is just going to take whatever's in that template and append it to our app element. And I believe that is it. Let me see. Gotta close this. There. Nope, still not it. Let's see. So we are getting the URL. Just function context. And I don't think I need to close that out. Do I? I might. Let me see what this does. No? Well, we got one function here, one function here. Okay. So that should be closed. Let me get rid of that. Okay. Alright, so I wasn't closing out this function here. I was thinking I was closing it by here, but I wasn't. So we have a function that has an open parentheses here that we needed to close out, and then, or close out here, and then down here was the same thing. And then before we actually close out of our function, we have to initiate it with app.run. And this is, if you don't have anything in your URL, this is what the page will show. It's basically going to run this get function. And that's just to make it, this is our default page. So if you want it to have your dashboard here, or you want it to have a login page here, that's what you would have run there instead of where I have it. So now we need to create this template file. So we're going to come over here and we're going to do a new folder. And then we are going to, what happened? New folder. And then we're going to call it pages. And then inside of our pages, we're going to create a new file. And we're going to call it home.template. And the .template extension, it doesn't really matter. It's just like a blade template, or something like that you use inside of Laravel. Essentially, it's just saying that this is our templates. So don't worry too much about that. So let's do h1, and then we're going to say homepage, just to have that on there. And I think that we need to call the script here. So let me see. We got. Let me get rid of some of this code to make it where it doesn't keep trying to scroll over for me. So let's go to view. I'm going to do word wrap, and then I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to remove this for now. I mean, this is all just a test, so this isn't really super important for what I'm trying to show right now. Then this. Okay, so just clean it up a little bit. Normally what I would do is, as you've seen in some of our previous videos, is I would create a minified file and then add all of these, and we can get to that later. But for right now, we're going to just start working on our just the Sammy part of it. So let's do script source equals, and then we're going to do js/sammy.min.js, and I don't even think that was a minified file, but that's okay. We can minify it later. And then we're also going to import our templates as well. So sammy.template.min.js, I believe. Yeah. Okay, and then last we need to do here is to add our app.js. So change this to app.js. And I don't know if that's going to work yet, but let's go ahead and give it a try. So it's not displaying anything, which I guess is fine. Not really, but let's look at our console. There's no console errors. So let me see here. So we're running it, swapping it, and we're not using any JSON to populate the data. So that should run. Let me go over here and do a hard refresh. Okay, so it has the slash there, and then let me see, so pages, here, let's get rid of this. Yeah, I think I need it. It's gonna have to go backwards. Okay, so pages, and then home.template, it should display home page. So let me take a look at the code a little bit more. Here, I'm going to put in a console log. I'm just going to make it say here so I can make sure that it's actually hitting this function. And console says that it's unable to load sammy.template.min.js. sammy.template.min.js. Unable to open that. Why is it unable to? Oh, it would help if I spelled template right. Template. Okay. And sammy.min AJAX is not a function. Console. Alright, bear with me just a second. I'm trying to see. There's got to be something I'm missing here. So I got it's probably this slim jQuery. Let me pull a real version of jQuery onto here. So let's try to do 3.5.1 without the slim. Maybe let's see if that's a URL. Okay, so that resolved the AJAX issue. It still says pages, home template. So let me move this so y'all can see what I'm looking at here. So it still says the pages can't be found. Pages, home. Let me make sure I spelled that right. So template. Okay. All right, let's try it again without this and see what that does. Okay, well, it removed that error, but then we're still getting content is not defined. We're using app, which we should be using. Okay, so I figured out what the issue was. I went ahead and undid what I did so that I can show you. Essentially, it was a non-issue. It was a mistake on my part. So if you look closely at the text that I have here, context, content, changing this to context now loads the home page the way that we expect it to be loaded. So if we come over here, do h2, this is the home page, and now it refreshes where it says this is the home page. So essentially, it was a non-issue. It was a mistake on my part. I thought it was a bigger issue where I was trying to run it in a folder, so I even tried to move it out, but non-issue. So doing it where we were now, even though it has the live URL on it, that's fine, apparently. So we are just going to continue going on now that we have the homepage template done. So we have the home page, I'm going to go ahead and let's just remove this for now, and let's say that this is home, and then we're going to create another page, and it's going to be a new file. Let's call this one I don't know, about.template, and then we're going to put about in here, and then from here we're just going to create another route that's going to be called about. So whenever we do that, it's essentially the same thing that we did here. We just are going to add the word about to it in the place of where the slash currently is. So if we do about here, and then we do about here, now we should have two pages. So if we go back to our browser, and instead of, and you still don't need to have this index.html on it. It doesn't matter. So this is just a little bit cleaner. So now if we do about, it shows the about page. So we've created these two page templates, and if you look at the source code that's being produced inside of your body, you still have all of the information that we have inside of the index.html is being displayed here. So it's essentially our main core template, and then we have the content of that template that can be displayed inside of these pages. So let's say we want to go to the index.html and we want to make it where there is a nav bar that can link to the other pages. We can do that without having to do it inside of the div ID. If we want to make this stationary that displays on all pages, the same way you would do it with an include in PHP, we can do it here. And let's just create a simple nav bar, and let's say we want to do this. The first one, we want to have it link to the home page, so we're going to do home, and now let's copy this, and we're going to make this one a link to the about page. So this one is that, this one is that. So now if we click on home, it goes to home, about, it goes to about. So as you can see, it's a very quick modification. So let's give this a little bit of styling to make it where you can actually tell that it's a, it's a mobile app. Again, it's a mobile website, but it's a mobile app. So over here, we're going to do, let's create another link, rel equals style sheet, style sheet, and then we're going to have it href, and we're going to make it go to css slash let's do style.css. You might also notice that I'm not using slash CSS because it's not really necessary here, because the content of the page is being displayed within this div. So we're never actually leaving the index.html. And this will also help you whenever you go to create it to a Cordova app, because the way Cordova runs it, it takes everything and throws it into a folder, and if you have a slash here, it's going to be referencing the file system of the device that it's on. So you don't necessarily want it to be referencing the file system. You want it to see that file immediately without thinking that it's being localized on the device. You want it to just read it from inside of the app. So having the slash here is detrimental to mobile development using Cordova. Okay, so let's go ahead and create this folder. So new folder, CSS, and we're going to create a new file that's called style.css. And then the first thing we're going to do is nav ul, and let's go ahead and add padding 0, margin 0. And right now I'm just going through it really quickly. You don't have to do it the way that I'm doing it right now, but it's just the way that I'm doing it. And then we also want to, actually, you know what? Let's throw in a bootstrap menu here. So let's go to bootstrap nav. And then we'll just grab some of their code because it'll create this. So let's just grab this for now, and we can paste that where we put in our nav, and then see how it looks. Looks great, sort of. I don't think I copied all of it, so let's get it to line up a little bit better and close out our nav, because I think that's what I did not copy. There we go. So let's just use the bootstrap navigation for now because we have this functionality. And we can get rid of all the stuff that we don't need. So let's get rid of this form because we're not going to have a search on here. We don't need to have a disabled item. We don't need to have a sub item. And we're just going to leave this one, and let's go ahead and get rid of this too. Alright, so take this, that, make this a little bit prettier, and then there we go. So now we have our two, so let's do our home was that, and then about was this. So now we have a mobile menu that will allow us to switch between the pages. And also you might be able to see that it's not making this mobile menu go back up like it normally would, because it's not actually leaving the page, it's just populating different content. So if you ever mess with Angular or something like that, this is kind of the same concept where you're using a single page to display these routes. Okay, so I'm going to do it very simplified on that. But what I want to show you is that the reason why you can create a mobile app like this is because you can also have a desktop version of the app. So whenever you're creating a desktop version, let's say on your about page, you want to have this in a column on its own. So if we go over to our index.html, we're going to put our nav. So we're going to create a row. And then below that, we're going to create a div class, and we're going to do column MD4. And then we're going to take this nav that we've created, and we're going to paste that inside of our MD4, which for the view that you're seeing right now in the browser, it's not really going to change anything, but it will allow us to show a desktop version of it as well. So then we're going to do div class column here, just so it fills up the remainder of the screen. Paste that out, and I think I need to move this in. The row is trying to end right here, so we're going to take this, and now we can close out our row. I messed up something somewhere. So we got our column, other column, and then the app. Alright, let's refresh. Okay, I don't know what that was. But so now, if we expanded this out to a desktop, you could see that it has this in one column and this in another column. That way you can control it on a desktop and then reuse that code to be able to just copy it and paste it into our Cordova application and build it out. Cordova, PhoneGap, whichever flavor you want to use. I personally use Cordova. Okay, so this is essentially how you do routing in JavaScript, and what's really cool about this is that you can use AJAX to grab content and push it out to variables. So if you wanted to, let me see, you could use AJAX. Let's see, trying to look through some of my notes to see where I've used it at. I think all of my notes right now just related to displaying content. But essentially what you could do is create a class in your home, and then you could, let's say, like div id equals test, and then in the JS for the home page, we could come over here and use jQuery, fill the HTML, and make it say hello. So we come over here, it's called test, and now on the browser, let's go back to the home page. It did not render. Why did it not render? Div ID tests, pushing out the text here. Okay, so I figured out why it's not rendering. It's because the template, it's rendering in real time, which means that the page isn't technically gathered at the point that this thing was being done. But if we come over here and we create a script, and then now we add that same code that we had here, this, to here, and then refresh the page, now it says hello. So the reason being is that the SammyJS renders the page in real time. So this variable test didn't exist where we were calling it at here because the page itself had not been rendered yet. So that's something to keep in mind. What I typically do in this case is I create a new file and then I call it initialize.js and then call that on the page itself. So here we would do script source equals js init.js, and then we're just going to take this and we're going to move that to our initialize file. So you can modify content on the pages in real time. It's just you can't do them from the app.js where you're creating the routes because they don't exist yet. So it's kind of a wonky thing, but that's the way that I've been able to get around it in the past. So you can change variables based on the page itself just by creating an additional file that you can run other functions. So let's say if you're pulling something from AJAX, you wouldn't necessarily pull it in the route. I mean, you could come up here and then you pass it here as a variable to the route for the route to be able to utilize. That you can probably do it that way. I've never actually done it that way, so that's something I probably need to test out in one of our next videos. But I think what I wanted to accomplish in this video is this, was just to show you how you can use SammyJS to render routes the same way you would in something like Laravel. It is a very simplistic way to do it, but I found that whenever you're doing it like this and then you're calling an API or you're hitting an external PHP function, it allows you to build what you have in your local environment and then push it out using Cordova to build an app. So there's a lot of really cool stuff that you can do with it that I've used it in the past for. It can create some really in-depth app that doesn't, it's a small footprint. So whenever you go to upload that app, it's essentially just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. There's no like really hard working code. All of that can be handled through an API. And that's because Cordova, for one, doesn't let you build PHP code into your app because it won't be able to render it because it's a JavaScript framework. So it's something like this would prevent you from having to use a lot of jQuery to hit your functions. It makes it a lot more secure. You can actually run authentication and stuff like that using your API. So what I'm going to do in this tutorial is give you a way to pull dynamically from a database. So you're going to be able to pull your navigation at the top, these routes, as well as the content for those pages from a database. But before we get started in that, we need to set up this part of it just a little bit better. So whenever we go into our index.html, one thing that we're going to be worried about is that we're going to have to hit a API server, I guess, that we're going to create that uses PHP, and in order to do that we need to worry about cores, which basically says that this website can't pull information from this website unless it's allowed to. And as you can see here, all of these references, we don't want to include all of these references to jQuery.com and jsdeliver.net. So we're going to do what I normally do, and we're going to create this mini.min.js file, and then it's going to get rid of all of this stuff that's up here. So I'm going to go ahead and start working on that part now. So essentially we're going to go into our JS folder, we're going to create a new file, we're going to call it mini.min.js. And I've showed you how to do this many times, so I'm not going to come in here and show you how to get each one of them. I'm just going to copy and paste some code that I have that I've done before, and we're going to save that. And essentially what that's going to do is eliminate these three scripts from having to be externally called. And in their place, we're just going to put in a reference to that JS file. So mini mini.min.js, and then we're going to do the same thing with our CSS. We're going to create a new file. We're going to call it mini.min.css, and then again I'm just going to copy and paste what I've previously done. You can reference other videos that I've showed you how to do that, namely our CRUD setup that we did. You can see how that was done. So let me go up here and we're going to copy this. Then we're just going to delete this here and change this to mini.min.css. Let me see, do we have our live server on? Alright, so we still have our live server running, so I'm going to go ahead and shut that down and then go live again, just so you can see that we are still using the live reload server that we've done in a previous video as well. So essentially it's this being live reloaded. And nothing else really changed. So if we go to the about page, go to the home page, all the jQuery is still working, everything's still working. I just kind of minified it and put it inside of its individual calls just to clean up the code a little bit and to make it where we can add the following tags to our index.html page, and that will allow us to hit this test server that we're going to be building. So we're going to add in a content security policy here, and that's going to tell our server that we're going to be setting up in WAMP. You can do it on a regular server. If you go back to one of our other tutorials, you can see how we've built a server using a solid state drive. So you can either do it that way, or in this case, since it's easier, I'm just going to go ahead and use WAMP to set everything up for the PHP and the database side of it. So in order to hit that server, we need to authorize that we have access to that server. So we have to do something here, and then we're going to have to do something on the other side. And then the other side of this is essentially just going to be a file that exists on this live server that we're already working in, and I'll show y'all how to do that in just a minute. But let's go ahead and implement our content security policy. So it's going to be meta HTTP equivalent, or equiv, equals content security SCURITY policy, and then we're going to have the content for this. First thing we want to do is do our default source, and then we're going to have one reference to self, which is essentially the website that we're on right now, and then we're going to reference to a server URL that we're going to create. So let's call it live. I think this one is, well, we don't have anything for it right now, so let's just do live API.local, which we'll create in just a second using WAMP. And then we also need to do our script source, again self, so that it knows to pull. That's why I moved all of those scripts into those folders, so it knows to pull from itself. And then we're also going to go ahead and do unsafe inline here, and we're going to close it out. So the unsafe inline means that if we have any inline CSS, that it will still run. Technically that's considered unsafe because there's ways that you can modify it, so it's up to you whether or not you would want to use that on a production. If we're going to be building an app, most likely they're not going to be modifying that the CSS that's inline. It'd be very difficult for them to do that. If they already know how to do it, then it might be a little bit easier, but for the most part, whenever we're building this out through iOS or Android, it's not really going to matter, so we can leave that in there. And again, this is all kind of what you want to do with it, so we're going to do it this way for this test purpose, but you might want to research the content security policy a little bit before you go to push anything out, because there could be some differences based on what you're actually wanting to accomplish. Okay, so we got that done. There was another change that I want to do that on this page right here. Okay, so as you can see, it tried to break it for a second, but refreshing it allowed it to come back up. But one thing that I noticed here, we were developing it previously in the mobile only version of it, so I'm going to clear this up a little bit, make it a little bit easier to use on a desktop, because that's what we're going to be developing for the most part here, and then we'll get into developing it mobile wise. It should pretty much do the same thing, but for right now we're going to take our nav bar and we're going to just move it out of this row in this container and then push it up here. And then I'm gonna go ahead and remove the BG light and the navbar light class that's inside of it and just keep the expand as well as a navbar. And then let's see, I think we can leave this the same. I don't really want to reference Bootstrap's icons. I never really use Bootstrap's navbar. I think it's ugly, but for this tutorial I used it initially, so I'm gonna go ahead and keep it in there. So I'm just gonna change this to menu, and then down here we're going to eventually dynamically generate these, but for now I'm going to leave these the way that they are. And I think that should clear this up. So if we go back to our page, now we have our navbar and our menu, and I'm actually going to decrease the size of that a little bit so you can see the desktop version of it. So home and about, they stay the same. Okay, so now we got that part cleared up. Let's go ahead and start creating our I guess our API server, and it's a simplified API. This is in no way ready for production. There's no authentication on it. There's nothing like that. So we can get to that in a future tutorial, but right now we're essentially going to be calling a PHP function or functions from a AJAX call inside of this to populate the page information. So title, content, slug, stuff like that, permalink, in order to make it where that we can actually use it on this system. But again, this API is not a full API, so I wouldn't use it on production, but you can use this as a jumping point for you getting something started on production. So we're going to create a new folder and we're going to call it API. Inside of this folder, we're going to create a new folder and we're going to call it config. This is where our database connections will reside. And then we're also going to create a htaccess file. htaccess file, which it controls server variables. Like, for example, we don't want it to say pages.php, we want it to say pages. And then we also want to make sure that this API folder for this specific server on WAMP is the I guess the root URL for it, so that way we don't have to type in the full URL every single time we want to do something with this code. So we're also going to, let's go ahead and create a new file. We're going to call it pages.php because this is what we're going to hit whenever we go to call those functions. Inside of our config folder, we're going to create a database.php, and this again is where our database will reside. And you can see how we've done databases in the past in some of our other videos, like the PHP CRUD video. This is the exact same thing. So MySQLi, and then we're going to do new MySQLi, and then we're going to pass the variables that we need for this. So localhost, because it will be a local host on our server, and I'm using the root and a blank password because we're using WAMP again, and I haven't set anything for that because this server is not something that I really worry with. It's a completely virtual server only for these tutorials. It just makes it easier for me. And then we're going to do live is going to be the database name, and then because we're on WAMP and we have another server running internally that we use for development through my company, we're going to go ahead and pass this 3308 port number because I don't want it to be looking at the wrong server. Alright, so that's all we need to do in our database.php file. Let's go back to our htaccess file. So there's a few different things that you can do in your htaccess file if you've never done it before. I'm going to copy and paste some of the generic stuff that I've done, and I'll tell you which each one does so you know how to do it. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to turn on follow simulated links, and then minus the multi-views. That just means basically that some of these links that we're passing to it won't actually exist except for in code, so it's going to follow these symbolic links. I said simulated earlier, but symbolic links. This just allows it to pass URLs that don't technically exist. They're not looking for a specific file. And that's something we can use later, but for right now we're only going to have one file that is going to be hidden, so I'm not too worried about it. And then we turn our rewrite engine on, and then we rewrite this base to API. Again, that is being used because we don't want it to we don't want to have to type in /API/ whatever we're trying to hit every single time we want to run something on this server. And then basically the rest of it is we're removing the PHP extension. So instead of having pages.php inside of our URL, we can just do pages. Or if you want to encrypt that page URL name, you can do that, and you won't have to worry about having extensions visible and stuff like this. And it makes it a little bit easier, a little more secure. Again, not production ready, but makes it a little bit better so that people can't just guess what your next pages are. And essentially that's what that does. It just removes the PHP extension and just links out to the page without the extension on it. So we're going to close out our htaccess now, and then in our pages we're just going to leave this blank for right now because we're not actually hitting it yet. So let's see what else. Oh, we need to create the server. So let's go over here to, I got our WAMP spun up already, and we're going to create a new virtual host. And over here we need to reference the folder of this. So let me reveal it in File Explorer. I know y'all can't see this part, but this is basically just I'm pointing out to this folder directly, and then we're going to call it live API .local is I think what we called it. Let's go over here, live API.local, live API.local. Alright, so we're going to create that, and you can't see what I'm doing now, but as you can see over here, it's telling me that the files have been modified and I need to restart the DNS in WAMP. If you're familiar with WAMP, you'll know how to do this. You just basically right click, go to tools, and then restart your DNS. And now if we go back to our local host, now we can browse out to live API.local, and as you can see here, it's actually hitting this PHP file. Hold on, let me think about something. It should not be, well, it's because there's no index.php page. So it's displaying the pages. So if we actually click on pages.php, okay, so I figured out what I did wrong. I put in, whenever I was doing the folder directory, I put in the /API for here, so I ended up going into the virtual host configuration for WAMP and removing the /API from the virtual host configuration. And now if you click on this, it brings up the live API.local, which is essentially the same thing as we were viewing previously, but now we can actually browse out to /API, and then now if we click on pages, it actually shows a blank page, which it's supposed to do. So I linked out to the API part of it. Normally I would do that because I'm using a subdomain for the API, not necessarily a folder inside of it. So I had to create this server, even though it's only going to exist essentially for the API usage in this case, but I had to create the server in order to access those files. So hopefully you guys can fix that on your side as well. But essentially we have our pages.php that we want there. We're currently doing our live server here. So now we have the server that's connected. So now we need to start creating these pages.php information, and then I'll show you how to use the AJAX to grab those pages. So essentially what we're going to need to do is create a function here that grabs a title content based on a slug that's passed over through the AJAX call. So let's go ahead and create a function, and we're going to call it getPage, and then we're going to pass the slug variable, and then we're going to, oh wait, nope, that is not where I wanted to do that at. Actually, there we go. Okay, so I was looking at the AJAX that I had done previously. So what we need to do on this part is we need to allow access to this page from the previous, from the actual live server. So there's a few ways that you can do that, and I'm not going to write all of these, but I will copy and paste them so that you can see them. So let's do our opening PHP tag, and then we're going to paste these headers. So the first header you see is allow access access control allow origin with a asterisk. That just basically means any server can hit this API server, which is not something you want to have in production. What you would actually do is control this through the URL that's going to be hitting it. In this case, we're going to be doing app, so there's not really a URL, so star may be the best way to do it, but you can control other aspects of it, so the allowed headers, methods, stuff like that. So you just basically, you have to see how you're going to use it. If you're going to use it as a desktop application, or not desktop, but a website, and you're going to be doing this, you only need to allow access from the server that's going to be hitting it, so that not everything can hit it. The next part is the allowed methods. You can do post, get, set, stuff like that. We're going to be doing post because we're going to be sending over the values as a post through AJAX, because that is a little bit more secure, because you're not passing that full URL every single time. It's actually passing over the variables in a hidden post field. Next thing we're going to do is the allowed headers, and that's X requested with, and that is essential for what we're trying to do. So this part right here is something that you definitely need to have on there, because that allows you to specify that it's being requested from this server to this server. And then finally, we're going to be passing over the content type of this page is going to be returned as a JSON, because that's what we're going to be using whenever we get into the AJAX. And then we're also going to have the max age set to 3600, so that after 3600 milliseconds, it expires. So it's a little bit secure. Again, this is not production ready, and I think I actually have this on there twice. Allowed headers. Actually, let's go ahead and get rid of this one and keep this one, because this allows the content, access control, allow headers, authorization. Actually, you know what? I'm going to leave this because that's the way I tested it. This might be a mistake on my part. So you might not even need this part. But I'm going to go ahead and leave it in there just in case. So now we have created access to our server from the AJAX call that's going to happen. Whenever we start to work on this, we're going to be passing over these post variables that are coming to us. But first thing we need to do is do include once, and we're going to include that config/database.php, and now you can see why we included that API inside of our htaccess, the rewrite base, or else we would have to do API/blah blah blah to include any kind of files on it. So let's go ahead and get into the first one we want to do, and we're just going to list out these pages to use in the navigation as well as use in the routing. So we're going to do if post, and then we'll pass these variables to the AJAX script whenever we get ready to call it. But we're going to say that if post type equals list, we are going to call a function called list pages, and then let's go ahead and do end if. Now let's create this function, list pages, and inside of this we are going to pass over our global MySQLi, which is the variable that we created in our database.php file. So this MySQLi here, that's just going to pass over the database connection information for us. So then we're going to do statement equals MySQLi prepare, and then we're going to do our select statement. So select slug title from pages order by let's see, we're going to do order by, and then we're going to create a variable called order ID so that you can actually control the order of those pages inside of the navigation. Then we're going to do statement execute, because we don't need to pass anything to this one, so it's just a straight call. And then we're going to do result equals statement get underscore result. Then we are going to check to see if the results have a value, and then else and if. So if result num rows is not equal to 0, or equals to 0, then we are going to, we're just going to, we can do nothing right now, so we don't really need to worry about that because it will have a call. So let's do row equals result fetch a sock, and then we're going to create a pages array, which is going to contain all of the information that we want to have inside of it here. And we might want to go ahead and let's declare this pages equals array. Okay. Alright, so now that we've gotten our data, nothing yet is being pulled from it because we don't actually have that table created yet. So we're going to just use this as a boilerplate for us. So let's do statement close, and then whenever we're returning something to an AJAX script, we need to return it in a JSON format. So let's do echo JSON encode, and then we're just going to encode that pages array that is currently there. Okay, so that's essentially the first function that we want to create for list pages, and now I'm going to go over and create the database for it so that it matches up with what we're trying to do when we're trying to pull it. So root, no password, MySQL, and I think we call this, what do we call it? Live. Alright, so let's create a database, and we're going to call it live. Create that database, and now we're going to go back to our pages, and we're going to do slug title from pages. So we need to create a database table called pages, and we want to have an ID, a slug title, content, and an order ID. So we need to have 5 columns. So let's list these out. So ID, order ID, slug, or permalink, or whatever you want to do if you're coming over from WordPress, and then title and content. So the content we're going to set as a text. Title we're going to do varchar, let's do 100. Slug we're also going to do varchar, let's do 100. These two can stay IDs, but we want to have our first ID as a auto increment. We're going to set it as the primary key, and that should do it for our table structure. Let's go ahead and create a few different pages. Let me zoom out of this a little bit so you can see it better. Okay, so don't have to do anything here. Let's set this order ID as 1. The slug, we're just going to leave it blank because it's going to be the home page. So let's do home, and then the text. For right now, we're just going to do the HTML ourselves. So this is the home page. And then we close out that HTML. And then we're going to do another one here that's going to be 2, and it's going to be about, and then about us. This is the about us page. Okay, so then we go here, make sure everything's populated. Alright, so that's what we want to do. So now we know we got the slug, the title. Since this is only the navigation, that's all we need for these. So inside of this pages array that we're getting, we need to pass the variables that we want. So this array is going to consist of the slug, and it's going to be row slug. Then next will be title, and it's going to be row title. And I think that's all we need to pass there. Let's go ahead and set this pages equals null just to have it on there. And then we need to make sure we return the right variable, or else it's going to be breaking, and I'm going to try to figure out why it's happening. So that should be the first call that we want to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this inside of our JSON, or inside of our app.js, which we've created here, and we're actually going to kind of restructure this a little bit so that it pulls these pages dynamically, and then the only thing we need to do is just make sure there's a template that's assigned to it. Alright, so let's take this function and we're going to remove it out of here, and we're going to create another function called list pages. And there's a method to my madness, so bear with me just a second. So function list pages, we don't need to pass anything to it, but essentially what this is going to do is going to grab that navigation at the top, and then we'll go in there and call this get pages and make it a little bit more dynamic as well. So let's do var pages equals, we're just going to do a blank array, and then we're going to do an AJAX call. Okay, so inside of our AJAX call, we're going to be hitting that URL that we created. So it's going to be http live, I think it was live.local. Where is it at? Live API.local. Live API.local, and then we're going to call that API / pages. And then we're going to pass a type. So the type is going to be post. Then here. Okay, and then the data type that we're going to be passing is going to be JSON, so we kind of keep everything the same. Because it's receiving JSON, it's pushing out JSON. And then the data that we're going to be passing is going to be the type that we're looking for in the function. So we're going to do type, and then we're just going to say list. Now, inside of your AJAX, you need to have a success, so function data, and then you also need to have a error, just in case something's happening, you will know why. So with our error, it's kind of iffy because you can't actually see the error because the parameters that are being returned is JSON. So it's going to give you a generic error, but you may have to go into your PHP and then turn it to get values and go check it to make sure that everything's working the way you want it to, or you can use something like Postman or something like that to actually hit that API and make sure that whatever values are needing to be passed are being passed. But just something you can worry about. So I'm just going to name this a variable, then text. That's not what I wanted to do here. Okay, text status, and then error thrown, and then we're going to just do a console.log, and then we're just going to log that error thrown. Okay, so in production you'd want to remove this so that people can't see why your API or your AJAX call is not working, but for right now we're just going to leave this in here. So let's go ahead and see if it returns anything. So we're going to do a console.log and then data. And now if we go back to our browser here and refresh, we should be able to inspect the element and open up the console and see that it is passing the database items. So a blank slug, about, home, and about us. So that's what we're looking for. So what we want to do now is take these two links and remove them from the website and replace it with what's being populated here. So in order to do that, we need to we need to append to that nav bar that we've created on the other side. So first thing we're going to do is, since this is coming back as an array, we're going to do .each data. Then we're going to pass a function where it grabs the ID of the array value, the ID as well as the item, and then we are going to what am I doing here? .each data. Why is this here? Hold on, just a second. Oh, that's because I need to close this. Okay, and then we're going to just pass inside of the nav bar. It's called nav bar-nav, and then we're going to do an append, and then that's where we're going to pass that li item. Now I got the nav bar-nav. If you look at index.html, we got the down here nav bar-nav here, which is where these LIs are existing. So inside of our JavaScript, we're going to copy this because we want it to look exactly like that, and we're going to put it here. Now with JavaScript you can't have multiple lines, so we're going to make everything kind of run together a little bit so that we get rid of any JavaScript errors. Now the things that we want to change here is that if it is a page, it's going to go to that slug and then add the title here. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to close out the single quote here, add a plus sign, and then we're going to it's item, so we're going to do item dash slug because that's what we're passing it over with in the array, and then we're going to close that out. And then here we're going to do item dash title, I believe it was. Let's go back and look. Title and slug. So we got our slug and the title here. So now if we save this and go back to our browser, now we can see we have two different pages. We can also see that it changes if we change this to descending. Now it's about us home because now this is 2, this is 1. So let's keep it at ascending for right now, and we can go inside of here and delete the LIs inside of this because they're being populated through JavaScript now. So we still have these two pages that are working just the way we want them to. There's no errors. It's being populated from the database directly. So what we want to do now is to not have to write every single one of these. If we want to add a new page, the only thing we should have to do is come in here and create the template for it. So right now we would have to create the database item to display the information, create the reference in the route here, create the page, so forth and so on, add it to the navigation. So what we want to do is make it as simple as possible. So if you add something to the database, it populates everywhere. The only thing you need to do is provide that template. You can't do it this way. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this up a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this since we're not actually using that like I thought we would. So we want to keep our route here for the home page because it's passing back a blank variable for the slug that's related to this the URL for the home page. So what we want to do is make it where whenever they type in something after this slash, it pulls what it needs to and grabs the template that it needs. Everything else should be populated with this. So we're going to come in here and we're going to do, instead of doing this about, we're going to create something very similar to it. So let me go ahead and copy this over, and we're going to use a Sammy variable, and we're going to do :slug. That's going to tell it that no matter what's beyond this line, we want to be able to pull it. So inside of your database, if it's inside of like about slash person's name, it needs to be about slash person's name in the database, and then it'll pull that and reference it here. Okay, so we have everything that we want here. What this is going to turn into is we're actually grabbing this parameter from the URL. So we're going to pass that parameter as the template name. So this dot params slug, and that's just because slug here, and then it's going to pass that template and basically grab what we want it to. So we should simply be able to remove this and have it work. Get rid of my breakpoint that was there for some reason. So now if we click on, let me remove this, make it a little cleaner looking. So home, about us, still no errors. So now if we go to our template, am I doing something wrong? Is it supposed to say the about us? We'll figure it out in just a second. Let me get rid of this. So the navigation still works like it should. So we need to go in there and add that dynamic content that we put into the database into the content for another AJAX pull. So inside of our pages.php, we're going to create another section here that is going to, let's do else if, and then post type, and let's just call the variable single. And we're going to run a function called single page, and then we're going to pass the post slug to that function. So let's come over here and we can kind of copy this because it's still just pulling something, it's not really editing anything. So let's call this single page. We're going to pass slug to it, and then over here we don't need the order by anymore, but we do need to pass a variable. So we're going to do select from pages where slug equals question mark, and then right below this we're going to do statement I think it's bind parameter, no, bind param. And then we're going to pass a string because it is a string that's being passed for the slug, and then we're going to execute it, get the result. Pages equals null, that's fine. So we don't need the slug anymore because we already know where we're at. So let's get rid of this and get rid of it up here, and we can pass the content on the next one. So let's copy this, and we're going to change this to content and content. And then we're going to close it out, and then we're going to encode page, so it's not an array anymore. It's not an array that's being added to anymore. So let's take this page. Okay, so that should give us this single page slug. So inside of our initialize.js, so we're going to go outside of our app.js and we're going to go into initialize, and we're going to create a function here, because the thing with this is that SammyJS is dynamically populating that content. Whenever it's dynamically populating the content, some of the variables, some of the HTML is not visible to you because of the way it's being populated. So we have to call this initialize.js on every file that we're using. And since we're doing that, instead of having to call everything and try to make it work inside the app.js, we're going to make it work here, and then we're just going to call it directly from the page. So let's create a function. We're going to call it get page. We're going to pass the slug to it, and the slug is going to be something that we have to hard code per page, but you will see why we do that in just a second. Alright, then we're going to, let's copy what we did here, because a lot of it's the same. So let's copy what we did for the list pages and just put that inside of the AJAX that I just wrote. Okay, there we go. So again, we're hitting pages. This time it's going to be single, and then we're also going to pass a variable called slug, and it's just going to be the slug that's being called. And then we don't need to do the each because we're only getting a single page now, but what we do want to do is create some functions that are going to be populated with this content. Actually, let's do console.log to make sure it's getting the data that we want. So this doesn't have to change. Inside of our about.html, we are actually going to, let's create a reference to this script. So let's do script source equals js/initialize.js, and just close that out. And then below that, we're going to do another script, and this is where we're going to reference that function that we created. So we're going to do get page, and then we're going to pass, PHP is trying to kick in, get page, and then we're going to pass this slug, so we called this one about, and that's going to allow it to pass into this with the about, which is going to then pass into this and then return that information. So now if we go back over here to about us, console should be producing something. It's not. Okay, let's just add this to the home page as well. It's not going to do anything right now, but I just want to make sure that I have it in there, and then we change this to nothing because the home page is blank. make sure that I called it get page slug, get page about. Okay, so now let's come in here and see why it's not doing anything. So console, let's make sure it's hitting this file. Do a console log here, and it's not showing anything in the console log, so that means it is not hitting this page at all. So JS shouldn't have to do a slash behind that. Alright, let's see what I'm doing here. So I guess since we're having issues with this would be a good time to show you what you can do if you run into an issue like this. So what we're going to do here is we're going to change this to a get, and then we're just going to pass in the variable about. So that means that on this side of it, where to go here? On this side of it, we can do type equals single, and you can see that it's not finding something. Undefined index type, get type. Hold on, let me take away this part so it's not trying to push it out as AJAX or JSON right now. So it is getting the information, but it's saying on line 12 it can't get. Okay, well that's fine because we're not trying to actually hit that one anyway. But so we know the content is working the way it should be. Then if we turn that back on, we should still get those JSON values, which we do. But let's see. So we got get pages. Oh, okay, I see what's happening. We did not actually call it. What we want to do is whenever it successfully hits and populates that navigation, we want to push the, call this function, and then it'll populate the pages with what they need to be populated with. So there is an error in there, but at least we're seeing that it's hitting something. So let's go back to about. I think I can get rid of this now. There we go. It's populating the content that we want now. So the issue was that we created the function, but we actually didn't call it because it was being called up here, but we didn't want it to be called there. We want it to be called only on a successful listing of the pages. So it calls the function now, and then it passes that slug. So now if we go back to the home page, everything is coming back the way that we want it to, sort of. Home, nothing's being passed, but that's fine. Okay, so we'll figure that out in just a second. But what I want to do right now is populate the page with this content. So let's go back to our template for the About Us page, and we're going to add in some scripting for it. So let's come up here and let's create a class called page, just so we know the script knows that we're on a page and we only want this information to be populated here. We're going to pass over an h1 for the title, and then we're going to do div class content for the internal content that gets passed. So that's all we need to do on that. And then inside of our initialize.js again, we are going to pass that variable that are coming from the data instead of displaying it. So let's do our jQuery, and then it's going to be .page h1, and then text, and that's going to be the data dash or .title, which you could have seen here where it had the information. It gives you what's needed to be populated there. And then here we're going to do page content, and then we're going to pass data content to that page. So let's go back to the About Us, and as you can see, it is passing what it needs to, but it is passing the paragraph tags in it. So let me go back over here, make sure it's encoding. Yes, that's encoding. So it should not be passing the variables, or it should not be passing the HTML, I don't think. Let's go over here and make sure. Okay, I closed it out correctly there. Alright, let's worry about that in a second. Let's get it to work over here, so we can differentiate the home page from the About page. Okay, so now let's go back to the home So it's displaying one value for both. So that means that there is a call inside of our app.js that is not working the way that it should be working. Okay, so I'm still looking at the issues here. You click on either one of these, it returns the About Us. So let's check this out again. Okay, well there it is. It is it's passing the one variable, so we actually need to do a post and then slug. There we go. So about home. All right, so it is working the way as expected, sort of. So we have the HTML is still visible, which I don't like. So let's come into our initialize.js and okay, so I think because we're passing the HTML, obviously we can't display text, so let's change this to HTML, and now it's displaying correctly. So that's what I want to do. So now is the big test. The big test that I want to do is to add this links the navigation links dynamically, but also be able to populate this page with only being able to create a template. So let's take this about template. We're going to copy it and let's paste it. Let's rename this to contact template, and then we're going to pass the variable contact. Okay, so now inside of our database, let's create a new page. So let's copy this one. We're going to change, or let's make it 3 contact and contact us, and this is the contact us page. Go. So now if we come over here, we should see a new page, contact us, click on it, contact us. So the routes are working the way that they should be. The pages are being populated based on us being able to add something to the database and then essentially just create this template. So that is exactly where I wanted to be at with this tutorial today. So let me go through real quick and see if there's anything else that I can add. I think that pretty much covers everything that we have. Let's just verify it again and create another page. So I want to save this one, save as, let's do services template, and then we're going to change this to services, and inside of our database we are going to copy this, change this to a for services and let's also add in ul li service 1 service 2. Let me make them standardized, and then finally close out that ul, hit go, and refresh services. Alright, so that is the proving point that it works the way we want it to. So essentially this project now it's tied into a database that uses AJAX and JSON to grab the information and populate it. It's using a PHP simplified API that can reside on a different server, that can reside on the same server, however you want to do it. And then it's also using a MySQL database in order to tie everything in together. So I think that is the... Oh wait, there's one more thing I want to do. So I don't know if you noticed this in the other tutorial that we did, but if we make this go down to, let me inspect it, and I'm going to change this to a mobile view so you can see this. So when you open up the menu and you click on a new page, the menu stays there. And the reason why it does this is because this page is the page is not changing, the content is. You only have one page, that's the index.html page where this menu resides. So it doesn't actually know that whenever you click on this it's changing that content, because the URL itself, it's not changing, it's just appending something to it. So what I want to do in the code in order to fix this, it's a very simple fix that you can do. Essentially what you want to do is, where's our app.js? Whenever you get to this part, you just want to add something that says navbar collapse remove class show. And I'll show you that real quick. So let's do navbar dash collapse, and then we're going to do remove class and then show. So that'll do it on the home page, and then this one would do it on all the other pages. So if we go back over here and we click on About Us, now the menu bar does not stay where it's at. It's actually acting like it's going to a different page, but it's technically not. Okay, so something else that we can do just real quick to, I guess, prep us for the next tutorial that we're going to do is I want to, inside the styles here, I'm going to add just some styling to the header and the nav so you can differentiate the pages that you're on. So let's first do header, and then we're going to do background dash color, and let's just make it a dark background. And then the next one we're going to do nav button, and then the nav a link, and then we're going to do color, and we're going to make it white, and we're also going to make it important. And then lastly we want to do we want to add a class. So nav dash item a current, and then we're going to change that color from the white link to an off-white. So let's do something like 929292, and then we're going to make that important since we made it important above it. So there's a pretty cool thing with SammyJS where you can control how the whenever this runs, if you look at the page now and you click on, wait, why did it not update this? Oh, that's because I don't have it wrapped in a header. Hold on. Here, and then we're going to wrap it in a header. Come on. Okay. There. Okay, so now we can see that everything is the color that we want it to be, except whenever you click on the page that you're on, it doesn't change that. But with SammyJS, there is something pretty cool that you can do. So we're going to open up our app.js, and then right after this last call for the slug part, we're going to do this.before, and it's going to be for all links, and we're going to run this function here. So we're going to do var hash equals document dot location dot hash, and that's because the hash is being passed. All of our links have the hash in it, so this will work out for us. So we're going to reference the navbar li list items, and we're going to add or remove a current class to it. So first thing we want to do is remove all of the links. So let's do nav li, not remove all the links, but remove any current on the entire thing. So we're going to search through the list items for an A reference, and then we're going to do remove class current. So that'll remove all the classes. Then I'm going to paste this because we're essentially doing the same thing, except now we want to look to see if the href equals the hash. So we're going to do this, and that. Oh my gosh. And let's do hash there. Alright, so I'm going to close it out here. Okay. And then we're going to add class instead of remove class. So add class current. So now if we go back to the page and we look, contact us is now what's being highlighted. About us is now what's being highlighted. So you can see which page that you were previously on or that you're currently on. So what I want to do is kind of change this up a little bit. I'm going to go into the config in the database, and you see here we just have a very simplistic call for the database. I'm actually going to change this to a PDO call for the database. Instead of using MySQL, I'm going to use PDO just because it makes it a little bit easier to manipulate it in the future, and it also makes it a little bit easier when we go to do those update, select, insert statements, stuff like that. So first thing we want to do is let's go ahead and comment out this part, and I guess we can remove this since it is a continuous file, and we're going to use PDO, and we're going to create this class for the database so that we can call it in our other files and our controllers that we're going to have for this page. So let's go ahead and create a class called database, and then we're going to set up a few private variables for the PDO connection. So we're going to do private, that's not what I want to do, this is private host, and essentially we're just going to copy over some of the stuff that we have at the top. So it's going to be localhost, and then we're going to create another variable, and we're going to call this one database name underscore name equals, and then we're going to be doing live. Basically you can see I'm copying it from the top. I'm just rewriting it so that we actually have private variables to work with. We're going to do private username equals root, and then we're going to do private password, and because I'm using a dummy database I just have the password set as nothing, and then we're also going to create a private port, and then we're going to set this to the 3308. And again, this is because we're using WAMP. You don't necessarily need to have a port on yours, but we have it on this just because we're using WAMP, and that's the only way we can connect to it locally, since we have another database set up that's kind of on the same it's on a different port, but it still uses localhost. And then we're just going to declare a private variable called connection or con, and then we're going to create a public function that we can use throughout the rest of the website. So public function, and we're just going to call it get connection, and then we're going to public function, and then we're going to do this con. Because we declared it as a public variable at the top, we're going to do this con equals nothing, just so it kind of clears out the database connections whenever it reconnects to it. So we're going to try to connect to it. If it doesn't connect, we're just going to pass a PDO exception error. So we're going to do this con equals new PDO, and you'll see that this is different than this. And there's different ways that it's set up, but PDO is a very good way to connect to a database. If you've never used it before, I highly suggest doing some research on it, because it's a lot more secure whenever you're going to pass things over, and it allows you to do things a different way. So this is just kind of showing you a different way to do it, but you'll see why I'm doing it when we actually get into writing the statements. So we're going to pass over the MySQL host, and then this is going to be equal to, and then we're going to pass over this host that we created at the top, and then I'm just going to add a new line to try to keep everything a little in order for you guys. You don't necessarily have to write it this way, but this is a little bit easier for me to show you what it is. Then we're going to be passing over this port, and then we're going to be passing over the database name, and this is going to be this database name, and then we're finally going to be just passing over this username, and then this password, and then we can end this statement. So now we need to finish out our try, so we're going to add a catch to it. So this will just catch any exception errors that come through. So PDO exception, and then we're just going to create a variable called exception, and then we're just going to echo out I don't know, database could not be connected and then we're just going to pass the database exception error. Exception get message, and that's it. And then we're going to return, because this is a function we're going to be using, we're going to return this connection. So this is what our new database file is going to look like, and I'll show you why we're doing it this way in a little bit. But there is also some new folders that I would like to create inside of our API file, because we're going to make it where it's not just pages, it's actually going to be kind of like routed so that you can use pretty URLs rather than having to pass IDs and all this other kind of good stuff. So let's go ahead and create a new folder. We're going to call this one controllers. And this isn't going to be like a typical MVC, model view controller that you would normally see. This is going to be kind of our own little thing, but it should do the purpose that we need it to for the API. So we're going to create a file called pages.php, and then inside of this pages.php we're just going to create a class called pages. And we'll come back to this in just a second. Let me open up my PHP. So we'll come back to this in just a second. What I want you to really look at is we need to take the information out of here and add it to these version 1 of our API. So in order to do that, we need to create a v1 folder, because that's where our API files are going to be housed. So we're going to create a new folder inside of our API called v1, and then we're going to create a new folder called pages. No, we're going to create a, that is not what I wanted to do. I want to create a new file called pages. And then inside of this, this is where we're going to, no, that's not what I want to do either. V1, oh, never mind. I don't even know what I'm doing. I was supposed to create a pages folder because we have a pages right here, which, looking at my test documentation that I did for this project, I saw this and I was like, wait a second, it needs to be created. Alright, so we're going to go in here and create a new folder called pages. And then inside of this folder called pages, we're going to create 2 files that are going to match these functions on this page. So the first one is going to be called read.php, and then we're going to create another one called single.php, which is essentially, if you look at this, we got list pages and then single page. These functions are going to be moved over to these so that we can call API/v1/pages/read, and it'll do essentially the same thing that's happening right here without having to worry about all of this kind of functionality that we built into it for simplistic purposes prior to this. Okay, so let's go over to our controller that we created for the pages, and now we can start working on this a little bit. So let's say we want to create a function for the read and for the single. That way we can call that on these, let me get rid of this for now. So we can call the read and the single here. So we're just going to create some variables, and then we're going to create these functions. So first thing we want to do is pass the private connection that we had created prior to this, and we also want to make it a little bit easier when we're going to run our database calls. We're just going to create a private db_table, which is going to be our pages table. So that way when we're writing these calls, anything on this page is going to be essentially affecting the pages database, or the pages database table. And then if you wanted to create another controller that handles something else, you could change this to whatever database table that you're wanting to hit. And then next we're going to do the construct for this class, which is just going to basically create that connection for us. So we're going to do public function __ construct, and then we're going to pass the DB, and essentially we're just going to reset a variable on here that is going to be this con equals DB. So this is essentially going to take this database information and it's going to pass it to the functions of this class. If you've never done a construct, yeah, I spelled that wrong. If you've never done a construct, then you need to look at how to do PDO and stuff like that. This will allow you to create and set variables that are going to be used inside of this class, even if they're not part of this class. So just do a little bit of research on the construct, if I could spell it correctly. So __ construct, and then you can set whatever variables you want here that you can pull from other places, like an environment or anything like that. For this purpose, we're just going to be pulling over the database information, and I'll show you how we're going to use that in just a second. We need to create a public function, and we're going to call this one read so that it matches our page name. And then inside of this is where we're going to essentially recreate the SQL that we have here, but using PDO. So we no longer need the global MySQL. We don't need to create an array because we're going to be passing it as a JSON object in order for it to be able to be utilized in multiple languages on the front end a lot easier. So we're pretty much going to blow away this entire page, but for now I'm just going to rewrite some of it. So let's create a query, and this query is going to be equal to select slug and title, which if you look over here, it's pretty much the same thing. So select slug and title from pages, order by order ID. But we also need to pass in the database table name. So instead of doing pages here, we are going to do this. And it's going to be this db_table. And that will allow us to do a select statement. And let me also make this a little bit prettier. So let's tab this over and then tab that over. Let me expand my window a little bit. It's wrapping weird. So let's just go back to, this will be fine. When I tabbed over, it was dropping this down over here because of how I'm having to zoom in for y'all to be able to see it. So we're just going to do it this way for now. And then we should be able to tab there so you can see that this is the select statement, this is the order statement, just to make it a little bit cleaner whenever you're looking at it from a distance. And then we're going to do statement equals this con prepare, and then we're going to pass that query. And then we're going to do statement execute. And then finally we're going to return the statement. So as you can see, the difference between, hold on, what is this? Nope, don't need that. So what you can see, the difference between this and how this is being done, this is actually in returning the JSON encoded element. What we're actually going to do on the read.php, we're going to iterate through what we need to. So if you look here, we got the prepare statement, the execute statement. This one we got the get the results and all this kind of stuff, but we're actually going to be passing over the statement rather than passing over the JSON return. So let's also create another one. I guess we could copy this, and we're going to change this from read to single. And on this one, we're going to pass a slug, kind of the same way that we're doing it on this one, where we're passing that slug over. We're going to keep that, and we're going to pass it as well. So INGLE. Okay, so we're still gathering the title, but we don't need the slug anymore because we are not going to be displaying that on the page, but we do need to pass the content, and then we're going to be coming back from the same database table. We no longer need to worry about the order by because it's going to be the only one that is there. So we're going to do a where slug equals slug. So slug, and usually what we would do is something like slug equals question mark. But in this, since we're using PDO, we're going to be passing over these variable names, and I'll show you in just a second how to get that. Essentially, it's the same thing, but it's a little bit easier to understand whenever you're going through it. Instead of having to worry about whether it's a string or an integer, you can just pass over what you're actually getting. So we're going to bind these parameters. So bind param, and then we are going to pass this slug variable that we are creating, and it's going to represent the slug that we are passing from the function itself. I believe that's all we need for these two. So now we need to go into our read page, and we're going to do this one kind of the same way we did the other one. We're just going to simplify it a little bit. So if we look at the top over here, we have all of this header information. We are going to copy it and we're going to paste it in here, but we're not going to use all of it. Essentially the only ones that we want to use is, because we're no longer posting to this function anymore, this function is all on its own. We're not having to worry about getting information, or we don't have to worry about updating or deleting or anything like that on this function. So the only thing we really need is the allow origin as well as the application JSON, just so it returns a JSON string or JSON object for us. And then we want to include the same way we did here, but I'm going to show you a different way to do it because we have it in a different folder than our database. We're going to, instead of doing just opening up straight to the database config, we're actually going to use the variable for PHP called server, S-E-R-V-E-R, and then we are going to pass the document root. And this is a pretty neat little variable that you can use where it actually grabs like the root of the folder and then it passes the rest of the information to it. So we have our database is inside of our API, so we're not going to do /config, we're going to do /API/config, just because we're coming from the document root. So if you look at our folder structure over here, the live folder is our document root, and then we have API, and then config, and then database.php. So we also need to take this, and we're going to include not the config, but we're going to do controllers, and then we are going to include pages.php, because that is what we called our controller. So it's now including this file and this file inside of it using the document root. Wish I could minimize this a little bit more so y'all can see it a little bit better without it wrapping. Let's see if I can. Nope. Do this. Nope. I don't know how to zoom out on this. I'm sure I'll figure it out as we go. But for right now, it's wrapping. Makes it a little bit harder to read, but it's okay. All right. So now that we're in here, we are going to create a connection to our database. So we're going to call it create a variable called database. And then it's going to be equal new database, because it's now a class that we can use, and then we can pull information from that variable. So db equals database get connection, and we're going to leave that there. So if you're wondering why I called it db, if we look inside of our pages controller, we're actually expecting the variable db to come to this class. So I called it db, and it's basically just grabbing that connection from the database. Okay, so next we have multiple items that are coming over here, so we're going to say items equals new pages, because now this the pages is actually a class that we can call. So we're going to pass our db to that class so that it can use it throughout the rest of the functionality. And then we're going to do statement equals items read. So this is the function that we created in here for read, and then the items is the new pages. So items, it's going to look into that control or that class, and then it's going to grab that function and it's going to send over the statement that we are returning over here. So just to make that a little clear, so as you can see why I'm doing it that way. Also, whenever you're working with a JSON object, a good thing to return is an item count. And then you can do item count equals statement row count. And row count is a PDO functionality. If you were using MySQLi, you would use num_rows. Since we're using PDO, we're going to use row count. And essentially what this is going to do, in the next part, we're going to write some code that's going to say if there's no items, display an error in JSON. If there is items, populate a response with those items. So that's why the item count is important. So let's do if item count is it's greater than 0, and let's go ahead and we're going to be using an else, and let's go ahead and do an end if. Okay, so if it's greater than 0, we want to pass over a HTTP response code of 200, so that it is verified that it's a page that exists. And if it does not exist, we want to pass over an HTTP response of 404. And this is just something whenever you are using JSON coming from an API, you want to know if it's hitting something or if it's not hitting something. So if it's not finding something, we want to send it back like a 404 not found error, so that the program knows what to do with that code. If it's a 200 error, that means that it found something and it's sending back a response. So we need to create that response. So let's go ahead and create an array, and we're just going to call it the variable R. And then we're going to add a response to this R. So response equals array. So inside of our array, we're going to be adding a key called response, and then we're going to be passing another array to it. So we're going to have to change our JavaScript over here to look for this response rather than just pulling straight from the JSON array, because the way we want to do it with the objects, this makes it a lot easier for us to group everything together. Plus we're going to be passing over this item count, so that way that they don't just kind of mesh in together. We actually can understand the response versus the count that's going to be coming back as well. And then finally we're going to create a another key called count, and it's going to be equal to this item count at the top. So what we need to do is grab the information that's coming out of it. So we're going to do while row equals statement fetch, and then this is going to be a PDO method. So PDO fetch associative array, and let's go ahead and end the while so I can get rid of that error. And we're going to create a variable called E, which is going we're going to create a variable called E that is going to be equal to the row, which is basically everything that we have in this select statement. So the slug and the title for all rows is going to be put into this E value, and then we're going to push that array that we're grabbing to the response. So let's do array underscore push, and then we're just going to do response, and then we're just going to push the new array of the row into that response. And then we're going to echo out JSON encode, and we're just going to push out that array as a JSON object. Now for here, if it doesn't find anything, what we want to do, I don't know if we were doing it in the previous one. No, we were not. So basically, if it didn't find anything, there was no error messages. So we're going to add an error message here. So we're going to do echo JSON encode, and then we're just going to encode, and then we're just going to create an array that you could create it however you want it to. The way that I normally do it is I pass over a type, and that type is going to be danger, because I use Bootstrap on a lot of stuff that I do, so I can automatically know if I need to display an alert message that has the danger class or a success class. So in this case, it's going to be the danger class, and then we're going to pass over a title, and we're just going to call it failed. And then let's pass over the message that we can display inside of a message box on the front end, and we're just going to say no records found. Okay, so basically if it has a count greater than 0, it's going to return a response code of 200, and then it's going to return all tables that it finds. And then finally, if it doesn't, it's going to have a response code of 404, and then it's going to return an error message. And I forgot to do that. No, okay. Why are you auto? Okay. Okay, so this is what we need for read, and we can test this out by going to our window over here, and I'm going to copy this and we're going to do API slash what we called it, v1 slash pages slash read, and we can see that it is currently returning home, about, contact, and services, and there's 4 of them that are being returned. And I'll show you how to do this in Postman as well, but for right now we can actually see that response code is exactly the way that we want it to be. Okay, so now if we refresh this page, the whole thing is going to break because we completely changed our database connection. So we need to change our JavaScript to match what we've done. I believe app.js lists pages. So we're no longer pointing to this. We're going to be pointing to v1 slash pages slash read, and we don't need to send anything to it because it's gathering everything that it needs by itself. So I think we are passing the response, so we need to make sure that we pass the response here as well, so it's not trying to gather everything. But I think that that would be all that we need to do here. So if we come back over here and refresh, let's do a hard refresh, we have our pages that are back, but if we click on them, it doesn't show anything because we need to modify how it's doing it over here by creating the single PHP. So let's go ahead and get into the single.php, and essentially we're just going to copy over everything inside of our read.php because they function very similar. Down here we need to change read to single. Let me make sure that I created that. Okay, I did. So single is being passed along there, and then we are going to pass over the post slug. So post slug, which is being gathered inside of this initialize.js. We don't need this type anymore because we're not we're accessing a completely different page. So we're still passing over the slug though. Let me go ahead and change this to v1 pages slash single so that it actually hits this page and we can test it whenever it goes live. Okay, so essentially we still need to pass over the response code, the count code. We're still doing this the same way. That's good. All this is good. And let's change this to new record found because it's only going to be returning one single record. So now if we go back over here and do a hard refresh, it did not do what I wanted to. So let's see what the console message is displaying here for us. Console. So it's saying that there's an unexpected token in the response for the JS. So let's see. Oh, that's because I didn't change it. We need to change the initialize.js. We are trying to get it from, let me see, because we are passing it as an array, a response, our JSON object back to the JavaScript. We kind of sort of need to do this the same way we did this. So we're going to throw it into an each loop, and we're going to grab each element inside of that data response, and I'm just going to take this code and paste it in here in the place of the nav bar, because it is being returned as an array because we set it as an array inside of the response in order to capture that count as well. So we do item.title and item.content. So it's essentially the same thing that we have on our the header navigation up here, but it's just passing over the h1 tag. So if we do a hard refresh now, it still isn't working. Why is it not working? So we got data response, single slug, post, item, h1, item title, item content. Let me see, is it still returning the error? So it's still returning an error there. So let me see inside of our single.php, UTF, access origin, database, get connection, items. Alright, so let's change this from items to item because we're not gathering more than one. And then we're going to be passing the single with the slug value. Got our item count 0. We're going to be sending over the response and the item count, and then we're going to be pushing it here. And Let's see if that works. Maybe it was just because the variables was items. I don't think that that's going to matter, but let's give it a shot. It did not. Okay, so let's look at our functions for this. So single slug, we are selecting it, title, content, and passing the table, we're slug equals slug. We got the connection prepared, we're binding the parameter, we're executing it, and then we're returning the statement. So slug is being passed, it's JSON, it's post, API v1 pages single, and that's what we called it, right? Live API v1 pages read, pages single. So read and single. Alright, so let me dig around a little bit. Okay, so I was playing around with it a little bit offline, and I got it to work, as you can see here. But the issue was that I was making the changes here. For some reason, it wasn't updating the JavaScript on these pages. I would do a hard refresh and all this kind of stuff, and it still wasn't updating it. So what I ended up doing was I copied the URL and went over here to /js/initialize.js, and then I just reloaded this page, and then it took my changes because it was still pointing to the wrong API. So whenever I refreshed it here, and I closed out and did a refresh, and it worked. So if you run into the issue, it's just because the JavaScript wasn't refreshing for some reason. Even with the hard refresh, it still wasn't doing it. Don't know why, but it's fixed now. So that's good. And so this is about as far as we need to go in the browser. What I'm fixing to switch over to is something called Postman. If you've never heard about it, it allows you to test API responses, whether it's your own API or another API. Is free, so you can sign up for it, download a version of it for Windows or whatever operating system that you're using. So if you don't have it, I suggest getting it and switching over to it right now, because that's what we're fixing to get into. Essentially, what I'm going to show you how to do is how to basically do CRUD operations over the API, but I'm not going to create all of the pages for it, because this is just a simplistic website that we would most likely have the administration panel or the CRUD part of it off to a different site. So for right now, this is just a front end, and it's doing exactly what we want it to. If we come over to About Us, and let's say we want to change some of the content now, we can add in the word test and click off of that, and now refresh, and it says test. So this is pulling from our API version of the original page that we had here. So we're no longer using this as a simplistic API. We're actually using a full-fledged API without authentication. We'll go into authentication in another video. That's a whole different subject all by itself. But for right now, we're actually using an API version of this page. So what I'm going to do here is delete this page, and we are going to just test it again, make sure we're still hitting where we need to, and we are. We are going to now switch over to Postman, and I'll switch back and forth so you can see the database updating. But for right now, we're going to switch over to Postman to see some of these actions here. So give me just a second to set it up, and there. Okay, so now we have our Postman window visible. This is what Postman looks like. It's very cool if you've never used it before. What we can do is you have these requests that you can put in. We're going to use a GET request to read all of the pages. There's no variables that need to be sent to it, so we're going to hit send, and then it's going to send us back the response of what it's getting from the database. So what we can do is take this single, and it's currently being there's a slug that's being sent over to it. So if we try to hit it without that slug, so if we go to single and send it, it's going to give us this big error message because it's trying to do something that it's not supposed to do. So what we can do is, I believe we can click here and type in slug, and we're going to pass the about slug. We need to change this to a post because we're sending it over as a post. Something's still wrong. What is this? Undefined index slug on pages single.php. Post slug is being sent over. Let's get rid of this. Parameters post slug. We should be. I don't know why this part would not be working. It's still trying to do it as a get variable. So bear with me just a second. Why is it sending it over as? Let's scroll over, see if there's any other options. No. Okay, let's clear that out. And just send. Okay. Send over body. Oh, okay. I'm putting it in the wrong place. When you switch over to body, go to form data. Now we should be able to do slug and about, and that should send over. There we go. So I was sending it over as a parameter. Obviously, it was trying to add it to the URL, which we're not looking for a get variable. We're looking for a post variable. And as you can see here, it's pulling back the information that we want it to. So what we're going to create in our code is a way to edit this information. So let's go ahead and close out of the files that we are not going to be using right now to free up some space. We can keep these open for now. We are going to now create a new page inside of our pages. So v1 pages, we're going to create a new file, and it's going to be called update.php. And this is just a way for you to be able to hit it. Again, there's not going to be any forms or anything on this page. It's essentially just going to be the PHP call that does all the work for us. So we have, oh man, I deleted that page. We had the information for the header that we could use, but let's go ahead and I'm just going to copy over, I guess, down to here. Okay, so let's take this from our read, and we're going to re-add some of those header information. I shouldn't have deleted that file for now because we still need it, but we're going to do content type. Oh wait, we already got that one, so that one's good. Let's go down here and do header access dash control dash allow dash methods and post. So if you deleted that file, that was one of the header items that was on there. So we need that in order to send post variables to what we're trying to do right now. So we got the database, we got the get connection, we got our pages, and now we're going to be sending over JSON to it. We're not going to be, it's going to be basically a JSON return as well as a JSON push to the function. So we're going to create a variable called data, and this is going to be equal to JSON decode, and then it's going to be using something that you probably haven't seen on my channel before, but it's called file get contents, and then we're going to be passing over PHP input, and this is going to allow us to grab that JSON string using Postman. So over here we're sending form value, but what we're actually going to do on the next one is in this raw, we're going to be sending over a JSON string, which is what you would do inside of your JS file. Just right now we're going to be emulating it on Postman rather than doing it inside of the JS file. And this will just grab whatever we send over to it. So in order to update a page, we want to set a item ID, and we're going to make that equal to this data that is sent over and the ID object. And then we also need to have, let's just say order ID, which is one of the options in the database. So data order ID. Okay, let me just verify real quick. You can't see my screen, but we have order ID, slug, title, content. So let's create one of these for each one of those. So order ID, slug, title, content. So we're going to do slug, title, and finally content. And this is the information we're going to be passing over to our API through JSON. So again, lastly, we have the content. And essentially what this is going to look like inside of Postman is just going to be a JSON call. So I'm not going to leave this in here, but we're going to do something like slug, or we're going to be passing the ID first, and the ID is going to be whatever we want it to be. The slug is going to be I guess whatever. No, we don't want. We're using the slug to update the make the pages visible instead of gathering the ID. So let's not update the slug in this tutorial because I don't want to break something on the front end for now. So instead of doing slug, let's go ahead and do the title, and then it'll just be equal to a string, and then we're going to do the content again, which is going to be equal to a string. So essentially we're going to pass over this in Postman. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that over, just paste it in the Postman so we can update that in just a second. So what we want to do is inside of our pages.php, we want to create a function that allows us to update the page. So let's go over here to create a new public function. So public function update. And then this function is going to be what we are using inside of our update.php. So we're going to do if item update, because again, item is the new call, the variable for the pages class. Alright, and then let's do an else, because we're going to have to return a 404 if it doesn't work, and then an end if. Okay, so now let's switch back over to our pages, the controller for pages, and now we're going to let's take it from here, because it's going to be kind of similar. There's going to be changes, but it'll be similar. So let's do update, and then we're going to be grabbing this database table, and then we're going to be setting the items. So set, and it's going to be, one of them is going to be order ID equals order ID, and then the next one's going to be title equals title, and then lastly content equals content. That's not what I want to do. That is. And then we're also going to pass on a where statement. So where ID equals ID. Okay, so this is the query that we're going to be using to update it, and then we are going to be preparing the query for the statement. Inside of this, we need to do the statement parameters. So let's do statement find param, and then we need to do order ID, and then we're just going to pass this order ID. Okay, let's go ahead and copy this for title, content, and then eventually the ID. So let's get this, make that a little bit easier, and then here we need to pass the content, and then up here we need to pass the title and title. Okay, so now we have all of the information that needs to be passed in order for it to update here. So let's go ahead and run our statement execute, but we want to, if it doesn't execute correctly, we want to show an error. So what we're going to do is if statement execute, and then we are going to not return the statement anymore. So inside of this, we're going to do if statement, and then we're going to be using that row count again, because we want to know if it actually updates anything. If let's say if a row was deleted and then for some reason it was trying to be updated through the API and it was deleted, we want it to return an error. So we're going to do return true if it was updated, else return false if it was not updated. And then if the statement just fails altogether, we're going to return false. Okay, and then end if. Okay, so I think that is all that we need for this. So again, we're looking for the order ID, title, content, ID. So if we go back to our Postman, I'm going to open up this database, and the About Us page is ID of 2. So we need to pass ID of 2, and currently the title is About Us, so we're going to do About Us test, and then the content is what is it? This is the About Us test page is what I want it to say. And then finally the order ID is going to be passed as, I think it's currently 2, so we're going to pass it as I don't know, let's just say 0. Try to make it come up first. Now if we run this, we need to change our URL to update and send. It did not respond with anything. Let me check the database. Well, it updated the database. Let me switch over to that real quick so you can see it. There. So if we go here, it says About Us test now. Let's do a hard refresh. And it's in the one place, but it did not return an error message or a success message like I was expecting it to. So let's go back to Postman and let's look at our code for a second. So pages, we have, if it executes, we want it to return true. Let me see what the update here is. Oh, that's because we don't have anything written for if it actually does anything. We don't have anything to respond with. So let's go to single, and we're going to copy this because we are going to be using that as our something very similar to that as our failed. So let's just say we want to change this to the page was not updated successfully. Please try again. Okay, and we're returning that 400 response code, and then up here we want to do the same thing, but we're going to return a success response code. We're going to change this to success and this to success, and this page was updated successfully, and then we can just remove this part of it. So now if we switch back to Postman and we send it again, there we go. Well, it's returning an error message, which is good. Let me see, maybe let's update the text on it because it just might not be updating anything. So let's remove test and hit send and success. Okay, so it didn't actually update anything because we didn't change any of the content. So let's switch back to our browser and refresh that, and it's back to About Us. We switch over to our database, the About Us test is here, and there. So let's change this back to what it was, which is order ID of 2. Go back to Postman, and we're going to do order ID of 2, and we're just going to change this back to About Us. Send, and man, it's very hard to switch back and forth between these windows. There we go. Alright, so everything on the update page seems to be working exactly as expected. So let's go back to Postman, and we're going to start running some update and some delete statements as well. So let's create the I guess the create page, because that would probably be the easiest one. So let's do new file create.php, and essentially the create page is almost the exact same thing as the update page, just like the read and the single are. So we're going to pass those as well. So let me just verify everything. So we're getting the ID. Now we don't need the ID because we are not doing that, but we do need to pass the slug. So let me actually undo that, and we're going to change this to slug. Okay, and then we are going to not do update here. We're going to do create here, And let's change this to created and not created successfully. Okay, so now we just need to create the function. So that was pretty easy. We can create the update and the create APIs are very similar, just like the read and the single APIs are very similar. And I actually don't need these anymore because the rest of our stuff is going to be done a different way. Okay, so inside of the pages controller, we should be able to take our update function and let's put it before. There we go, and change this to create. Alright, so now we have our create function and our update function. We're going to change this to insert into the database connection or the database table, and we're passing all of this information, and we're going to remove the where. And this needs to turn into slug, because now we need to add a slug when we add a new page to it. Slug, and we can get rid of the where statement because there's no where for it yet. This won't change, this will. So let's change this from ID to slug, and then over here ID to slug as well. And then we don't need to, do we need to check if there's a row count? I think we do. Let's keep that in there for now and see what it does. No, we don't need to do a row count because we're not doing a select statement, so it won't actually know. Let's see. We'll see. See if it returns anything when we go to create something. So now we should be able to go back into Postman, and we're going to change this to create. We're going to get rid of this ID variable and change this to slug. And let's just do like a test page. So test. And then let's name it test. This is the test page, and let's set its order ID 5, because that would be the next page that's created. So create, and we're going to send that, and it says success. So let me switch back over to the browser, and let's refresh our table, and now we have created successfully a test page. And if we refresh that, we have our test page here. So if you remember from the last tutorial that we did, it didn't show anything here because the page has not been created. So if we wanted this to actually be a visible page, let me get rid of some of these other tabs, pages, we would have to create something here. So if we want to, we can come over here and let's copy this one and paste it in. Let's change this to test.template because that's the slug. Then over here, same thing. Now if we go back to our browser and refresh, now we have a test page. So you can see, adding a new page is pretty easy whenever you're creating it through the API, or you have direct database access. But you can actually create this content management system pretty easily using PHP that does this this work for you. So for right now, I'm going to delete this because we are not going to need that. So if we click back over here and refresh, there's nothing there, which is what is expected. And now we need to remove it from the database. So we need to create a delete PHP. So let's come over here, and I believe the delete one is going to be very similar to this as well. So let's just copy this and paste it in and rename it to delete. There we go. So all of this is the same. That's the same. We don't need to grab anything but the ID and change this to delete. And let me copy this so we can update this as well. So delete it, delete it. Okay, so now we need to go back into our class, and we're going to add a delete function down at the bottom. So let's do, let me just copy this. Once you have it written the first time, it's pretty easy to go back and not have to keep writing it over and over and over again. So I copied the update and made it into the delete. and we are going to change this to delete from this database where the ID equals the ID. So we don't need any of this. And once it gets executed, it's going to count the rows, and this is essentially going to make it where if it tries to delete a record that's not already there, it's going to do a row count. If it's unsuccessful, it's going to return a false to let you know it's unsuccessful. If it deletes it, then it'll delete it, which I'll show you the response to that in just a second. But that should be it for the delete API. So let me switch back to Postman, and actually let's grab that ID first. So the ID is 5. We're going to grab the ID and we're going to change this to delete. Let's just remove all of this, and we're going to pass in that ID of 5, and we send it, and it says it was deleted successfully. So let's check it out and see if it was actually deleted successfully. Refresh, deleted successfully, and now we should be able to refresh here and see that it was gone as well. So what happens if you try to delete it again, since we know that page does not exist? You get a failed saying it was not deleted successfully, so it's returning the correct message. Okay, well, I think I have been recording for a while on this one. I want to say this is probably going to be 45 minutes to an hour long. I think that is all that we are going to do for this tutorial. Maybe next time we can get into actually taking what we've done and I guess maybe adding some authorization, some tokenization or something like that to secure this API. We'll get into that maybe in a future tutorial, but I think for right now we're kind of taking this API and we're making it into a CRUD application that's a lot more API functional, that's using classes. It's showing you how to use the construct and stuff like that. So I think it's a lot easier to read it this way compared to how we were doing it with that single file. Essentially what we could do is create another controller for, let's say, users. You can have a users.php which has this functionality, and then you create a new folder for users, and then you can have all of these pages for that user as well. So there's a lot of really cool stuff that we've done so far that you can expand upon, but right now I think I'm going to go ahead and call this one as done. So I think that'll do it for this compilation. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. I know it was a long one, but basically towards the end of this video you should be able to work with SammyJS and your own custom API and be able to put it all together into something that utilizes AJAX to populate some content. And then you also should be able to view that API using Postman. So you should be able to take what we've went over now and be able to push it out to maybe some additional pages, be able to create additional fields, and be able to pull it in through your own custom API into a flat HTML, JavaScript, jQuery, whatever kind of site using AJAX. So if you like the video, give me a thumbs up, leave comments in below. I think I'm going to start doing a few more of these compilation videos, especially with the holidays, just because I don't know what my recording time is going to be, but I should be able to put some stuff together, and based on the video that I did in the past of the CRUD application development, you guys really like it. So I think it's going to work out for everybody. Thanks for watching, and I guess I'll talk to you later.